this video, we are going in depth on editing portraits and headshots in Photoshop. So let's get started. You probably noticed right away these two zits, those aren't real. I just added that to show you how to remove it. But let's pretend like this is our original photo. It would look just like this in Photoshop. And the first step is always duplicating your original layer so that we're not doing any destructive editing within Photoshop. Let's go ahead and right click, come up to duplicate and hit OK. So now this is the layer we're editing and we can go ahead and turn that off for now. Not that it makes a difference, but we're just going to have that saved there in case we need it later. Our first step, we're going to come up to our spot healing brush. And then all you have to do is brush in the parts that you want to remove and they're gone, just like that. Now we could also pretend like this stuff on her face is acne and remove that as well, but I think she wanted it there, so we'll go ahead and leave that in the shot. Which brings up an important point. It's really important not to remove anything that's going to stay on someone's face, like a scar or anything that's going to be there for more than a couple months. Things like freckles are definitely not blemishes and should not be removed. Let's go ahead and go back to this photo and see if there is anything else that should be removed. And I would say no, I'm not seeing anything. So we can go ahead and start our next layer of editing. To do that, we're going to actually create a new layer just so that we can easily go back if we don't like certain changes. And this kind of provides us an extra safety of having a history of all the layers of changes that we do. And for this next layer, we're going to come up to Filter Liquify, which opens up this box. And you can tell a face has already been detected. If you're not noticing that, go ahead and click Face Tool. You might have been on one of these by default, but we're going to go ahead and select Face Tool. And Photoshop can tell where the eyes, nose, mouth, every part of the face is. And over here, you have sliders for adjusting each one. So I'm showing you how to use this, but I recommend not using this. And that's because most of these adjustments affect permanent things on a person's face that isn't going to change from month to month. Ethically, you might not want to. So the first is eye size. I can change the size of her left eye to be larger or smaller. We're going to go ahead and leave that how it was. Same with the right eye. Eye height changes instead of the size overall, it's just adjusting the height up and down of her eye. The next one is eye width, pretty self-explanatory, and you can do it for the left eye or the right eye. And then you can also link these so that they grow or shrink in size together. Eye tilt, this, so typically having your eye tilt this way and this way would show signs of like a more optimistic person. And so that's a change that if you do slightly, technically, like when someone's smiling, that happens on their own. So it's kind of like shifting their mouth to be more of a smile. It's putting more of a smile in their eyes. You might be able to get away with that one, but I don't really recommend using any of these. So I'm going to set that back to 0 and this to 0. Eye distance, this isn't something that's going to change on a day-to-day, and I don't recommend doing it. So nose height and nose width, those are pretty self-explanatory. And then coming down to the mouth. The mouth is something that changes a lot. And so you could make her frown more or smile more, and that's something that ethically I feel like makes a little more sense. You can change the height of the upper or lower lip. The mouth width isn't something that's going to change often, and so I would recommend leaving that alone. Mouth height is, again, the location of the mouth, which isn't something you'll want to change very often. Same with the forehead, chin height, jawline, face width. To give you an example, you might have a client that's like, hey, I'm about to lose 20 pounds. Could you take a few pounds off today? And whether or not you do that is up to you. I would probably say no personally, because I think it just gets into a whole other topic that, yes, so this is how to do it, but I don't recommend doing it. So that's the basics on doing Liquify for the face. Basically, the whole purpose of this tool is to distort the face. And so I don't recommend doing it, but I think it's important that you know how, just in case you decide to do that. Actually, you know what? I'm going to come up to Filter Liquify, and I am going to just do a few of the changes just so there's an obvious before and after. So the eye tilt, I'm going to go ahead and link these and have her just smiling a little bit more, change the smile a little bit, and then call that good for now. You could also do like eye widening to make them look like they're a little more awake, and I feel like that's all right. But here's before and after. So a subtle change, and I don't ever recommend doing more than a very subtle change. If you're distorting someone's face. So I'm going to do duplicate layer, and we're going to go on to the next step. So we're now getting into the dodge and burn tool. This is going to emulate the same changes you would do by changing the lighting on their face or changing the makeup on their face. However, the reason you would change the lighting or makeup on their face is to give the same appearance of distorting their face. So even just this in itself could be semi-controversial, and I recommend not ever doing it at a high amount. So anyway, with that disclaimer, I'll stop apologizing for every single thing I'm teaching you and just get into the teaching part of it. So I'm changing the brush size. I'm going to go ahead and do it about here, and I have it set to burn, and that's going to darken areas, and I'm going to have it darken the midtones. And basically, she already had a really good makeup artist do makeup. But typically, like if you're making this section here darker or burning it, you can tell she already, like I did it way too much just to show you, but you can tell it really tones that part of the cheek, and you assume that this is a natural shadow, meaning like this part of her cheek is sticking up a lot more, which gives the impression that her face is a lot more toned. And then anytime I make a change with like dodge and burn, I would always bring the opacity of it down just to make it more subtle. So there's still a very distinct change there, but you wouldn't want it at 100% opacity. So now I'm going to merge that with the one below it because I changed the opacity, and then I'm going to go ahead and duplicate layer. And we're going to come over to the dodge tool. And the dodge, again, does the opposite of burn. It's going to make areas brighter. So let's go ahead and look. I'm just going to do the midtones instead of just shadows. And let's highlight her eyes a little bit more. And then this part right above where we burned, and then this part right below where we burned. And we'll call that good for now. And so zooming out, you can see before and after, it's very extreme. And so we'll go ahead and change the opacity of it down. Yeah, I'll put it at about 35%, and you can see it still makes a big difference, but it's not over the top. And because I changed the opacity, again, I'm going to merge it with the layer below it and then duplicate layer. And for this next layer, we're going to go ahead and do dodge and burn again, but I'm going to do it on like smaller details. So let's go ahead and make our brush a lot smaller. And we're going to zoom into her eye. And the way that we're going to zoom is with this setting down here. Instead of 70%, let's make it 300%. And while I have dodge selected, I'm going to go ahead and just highlight the very middle part of her eye. And I'm going to do shadows and bring that up on the middle. And now I'm going to right click, switch back to burn, and change my brush size. And I'm going to burn both the outside of her eye, and all that's really doing is adding a lot of contrast to her eye. And let's go ahead and do the same to her other eye. So I'm going to burn the edge of it, as well as the middle. And then I'm going to right click, come to dodge, and brighten up the middle. And now if we zoom out, I'm going to go back to 70%, and then turn that layer on and off. And if you notice in her eyes how they stand out quite a bit more, the next thing we can do to her eyes is right above the burn and dodge, you can right click on this blur or sharpen tool. I'm going to select sharpen. I'm going to double check my brush size. That all looks good to me. And so now I'm going to go ahead and sharpen her eyes. Might be too much, but I can turn the opacity down. And now I'm going to turn that layer on and off so you can see. So it's a subtle difference, but overall it really helps her eyes stand out and kind of capture attention. So now I'm going to right click on the layer, duplicate again, and do a new layer. And this time instead of sharpen, I'm going to blur. So right click, blur tool, come up and check my settings. I think I'm going to make the brush a little larger. Strength is at 100, and we'll call that good. And for this, I'm just going to blur the things that are in front of her eyes. So like her nose is out in front. Her forehead I can blur a little bit, and that's going to soften the skin. You don't want to overdo this, but just doing a little bit of it is going to help. And that just really brings attention back at her eyes. So I'm going to turn it on and off. And it's just a subtle difference, but it helps draw attention to her eyes more. So now I'm going to right click, duplicate another layer. And in this photo, you can't really see her lips, but I'm going to use the burn and dodge tool. We'll grab the dodge tool first, and I'm going to put it through the middle of her lips. And then I'll grab the burn tool, right click, burn, and I'm going to make the brush a little larger. Yeah, we'll call that good. And I'm going to burn the inside and outside of her lips. And then you could also put dodge along the top of the lip. And the whole point of doing all that is kind of similar to changing the lighting on her cheekbone, makes it look more toned. Changing the lighting on her lips makes it look like her lips are a little bigger or three-dimensional and stands out a little bit more. The next thing that we're going to do is right-click, create a new layer, duplicate layer, enter. And then I'm going to, this time, just grab the actual brush. And then we'll come down to white. Double check my brush size. Yeah, I think it's okay. And we're going to just brush white onto her teeth. Now this is obviously very extreme. And so, yeah, that looks pretty bad as is. But if we come to our opacity mode and just do lighten, and then bring the opacity way down, I can now turn that on and off. And you'll see just that subtle amount helps whiten her teeth, although I should probably just go a little bit more with it, so it doesn't look like she only has 2 teeth. And then I'll turn it on and off. And then just in case I drew too much, I could mask that layer, choose black, and then just draw on the edge of it so her teeth aren't coming up onto her lips. And then just one more time, we're going to turn it on and off to see the difference. And it's probably more extreme than we even need, so I'm going to turn the opacity down even more to like 7. Check before and after. And because I turned opacity down, we're going to go ahead and merge it now with the layer below it. And then we're ready for the next step. So duplicate layer. And let's go ahead and take a look at our before and after so far. So I'm going to make all of these ones in the middle invisible, turn on the very bottom one, our original, and then turn the layer we're working with on and off to show before and after. So that covers all the main tools I assume you would want to use while editing portraits or headshots. You could obviously go a lot further, like I could turn her eyes to be blue or change the color of her lips or hair or stuff like that. However, for the most part, the main tools that you'll be using is like the spot removal to get rid of blemishes, and then just make slight adjustments with the burn and dodge to change lighting and stuff like that. However, if you wanted to full on distort their face using liquify, you now know how to do that as well. So I think it's safe to say you now know all the tools to be an expert at editing portraits or headshots in Photoshop.